I don't know what cybersecurity means.
The vendors are trying to define the problem space as the problem they can solve. Leave me the fuck alone.
Okay, so what are you going to do in the meantime while they're stealing all your shit?
I'm not your tech support, bitch. Fuck off. So I'm constantly going, no, stop that, put that down, don't touch that, take that out of your mouth.
See, I was going to call that happy horse shit. And it just drives me fucking crazy.
Well, shall we get rolling here?
Alright, we shall. Today is Wednesday, July 16th, and this is episode 76 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me tonight, as usual, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Good evening, Jerry. Sorry that we're a day late. That's my crazy work schedule getting in the way, or 2 days late, as it were.
Oh, no worries. I was able to put the time to good use. So the first thing I have is a comment from Bob, and it's actually more of a question to our listeners. And Bob had some ideas, but to me, I was kind of interested in what everybody else thought. So what do you do? Let's just hypothetically say you have an enterprise or even a medium-sized business that uses Windows and Active Directory. What do you do if your domain gets compromised? Clearly the advice has always been with a server, if the server's compromised, you rebuild the server. But how does that apply in the context of an Active Directory domain? Because it gets a lot more complicated. You have domain controllers and accounts propagate across, and the obvious question or the obvious guidance would be, make sure that all the accounts are still valid and change passwords. But is that really realistic, given that you have all these domain controllers that somebody could have planted stuff on, and do you really have to go through and rebuild each of the domain controllers, and then do you shut them all off at the same time and start over, or what is the best practice there? I've actually not really found any good best practice there.
What immediately comes to mind to me is to update your resume and quit.
The personal business continuity plan.
Wow, that is a tough one.
Yeah.
I need to think about that a little bit before I have a reaction, because that is a hell of a worst case scenario there.
And Bob's seen it a couple of times.
You'd have to assume all the accounts are popped. You'd have to assume all the passwords are burned.
Exactly.
You'd have to assume there's all sorts of Active Directory that builds trust, and I probably would have to do some research on what sort of things you could truly exploit and truly go after if you had full access to everything sitting in an AD server. What sort of stuff could that get you? I bet it's pretty gnarly.
Yeah, and that's what got me thinking and prompted me to ask the question. There's now we're up to like 18 listeners. I figure that somebody out there might actually have an idea.
And to be clear, Bob asked the question.
Yeah, Bob. Yeah, I'm just passing the question on for sure.
Yeah. I'm curious if Microsoft has any documentation on what to do. I honestly don't know. I haven't. I'll have to go do some research.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so moving on, our first actual story tonight is that the ask.com toolbar has been updated and includes 20 fixes for remotely exploitable vulnerabilities in the Java Remote Access tool.
Color me shocked.
I know, crazy.
So, a little side story on that. First of all, yeah, go patch. I was curious because Java 8 has been out for a while, and I was like, why isn't it being offered as an update? And I was trying to find it. I was like, why am I keep getting Java 7, right? I update 65. Why not Java 8? And is it worth going to Java 8? And anyway, long story short, I finally found somewhere on Oracle's page, why isn't Java 8 being offered for download on this page? And their reality is, hey, it's still new. We want to give it plenty of time for the developers to mess with and make sure everything's working. So if you really, really want it, you can go over here to this deep link on this other page and you can download it, but it might break a lot of stuff. So just a random thing I discovered today. Why Java 8, even though it's been out since March, is not publicly.
Interesting.
Easily.
That's interesting because Java 8 is supposed to fundamentally be a little better, maybe less of a remote access tool.
Right, and that's why I was curious why it's not being offered. But if Oracle really gave a damn about Java security, they would auto-update and make life a hell of a lot easier as opposed to just being nagware to install ass.com toolbars. Shame on you, Oracle. Shame.
And also not relink to the browsers each time you install.
Oh my God, just drives me. How not to do it.
Yeah.
Do you understand, Oracle, how much Java is exploited? Right? It's like, well, easy button, Java.
How can you not? I mean, it's in every freaking security report that's released these days.
It's like they don't care.
I don't think they do. You know, and what even kills me more is they don't even have a way to monetize that problem. You know, it seems to me like they should have been the ones to buy Mandiant. Oh, well, I guess Oracle's not going to sponsor this show either. Okay. So,
well, you know, I was talking to Larry Ellison the other night, and no, he said no.
Didn't work out. Got it. Well, another one off the list.
It's true.
Next story is coming from eSecurity Planet, which is such a weird name for a blog. But anyway.
Screams credibility.
It does. It does. So the title is 67% of critical infrastructure providers were breached last year. This was a survey of 599 executives from 13 countries in the oil, gas, energy, and utility industries. And the survey found that 67% of the surveyed executives said they had been breached in the last 12 months. And by breach, they mean they had lost confidential information or had suffered a disruption in operations as a result of a IT attack, I guess. So going on, they said that some other interesting statistics were 64% of the surveyed people said they were anticipating a serious attack in the next year, and 78% of those anticipated attack on their ICS and SCADA environments. But only 28% rated security as one of their top 5 priorities. Meanwhile, 60% said that minimizing downtime was their top priority. And I think that actually is very telling. I mean, that is the problem right there. You know, and to be honest, I'm not sure that security should be one of the top 5 priorities.
Unless you can show how security prevents loss of downtime.
Well, that's the key,
prevents
right?
Downtime.
It's how does it meet? You know, it has to match your strategic objectives.
Mm-hmm.
So,
that is a fair question, right? My utility provider, let's say for electric, can't go down a couple times a month just because, well, we were making a patch, right? That's not acceptable to me as a customer.
Exactly.
So it is a fair balance of priorities. However, they're not mutually exclusive.
Well, that's true. But I think, I just don't think that generally security stands as its own, corporate strategy imperative. I think it is something that underpins most of the different strategy elements of a business, but it has to support those. You're not in business to be secure. You're in business to sell a product, or you're in business to, develop a service, or, sell a cancer drug, or you're in business to do something, and you want to do it in a way that doesn't get you fined or doesn't get your name disparaged in the press, and on and on and on.
It's true. For the record, I'm in business to launder money for my meth cooking business, but that's an aside.
Yep. Uh-huh. Wow. Recorded for all to hear in the perpetuity.
Be sure to visit me in jail.
Absolutely. All right. Boy, we've not even released this yet, and the NSA is already reviewing all your crap.
You think they weren't already?
Well, they're going back.
With all the lists I'm on?
They're going back. They're like, what did we miss?
God.
What did we miss?
I'm like a domestic terrorist red flag from here to the end of time. Libertarian, anti-government. I'm a pilot. I have lots of guns. Computer security stuff.
You're a redhead.
I used to go to Israel a lot. Come on.
Seriously.
There's probably vans sitting on my house right now.
You like books?
I do like books. That's right.
Yeah, there you go right there.
I have a cat. That's huge.
Seriously. Big problems there. All right, back on track.
Sorry.
47.
Sorry.
47% had attributed one of their breaches to negligent insiders, but yet only 6% provided training to all their users. Now, I had to wonder when they said 6%, only 6% trained all their users. Does that mean that a higher percentage trained some of their users and, the male people didn't get trained, or, it's a little ambiguous. They did have 3 interesting recommendations.
For the record, the third one has a typo in it.
Oh, I know.
Sense until you go read the actual report. So, FYI, if you're looking at the article we mentioned, there is a typo in the third one.
A very serious typo, yes.
Yes.
So the first recommendation is to develop an all-encompassing strategy that aligns with business strategies and goals, providing a roadmap to follow. And
that's awesome. Easy to say. Now, what the hell does that mean to an individual company?
See, I was going to call that happy horse shit.
No, I don't disagree with the concept, but that is such a 150,000 foot view that it gives actually no guidance whatsoever.
It's a platitude.
It is.
That's all it is. It's a platitude that sounds like really great general advice, and it is great general advice, but
it's not useful.
Yeah, be a good person.
Oh, really?
Do good things.
Oh, why didn't you tell me that earlier? Wow.
So,
doing it all wrong.
So their second piece of advice was to manage identities and entitlements to provide the highest level of identity assurance and reduce critical employee errors. Again, another great idea, somewhat difficult to do across the board, and certainly in some countries it's harder to do than in others. But generally I think that's some sage advice. However, it's something that we've struggled with for decades. The third piece of advice they have is isolate and block. This is where the typo was. They said isolate and clock.
No, they meant isolate and cloak.
Oh, cloak.
Cloak is what's in the actual PDF.
Okay. Isolate and cloak endpoint devices to hide them from probing malware, which...
this is old advice. This is back to the days when you had self-spreading worms.
Yeah.
That is not how malware is getting on your devices as much today. Yes, a little bit, but that is not typically the problem. I don't know I agree with that particular statement as my top 3.
Right. And, again, my comment on this all 3 recommendations is that they are indeed happy horse shit. And this kind of thing is very hard, right? It takes good planning and good design. You have to be thoughtful. There are conflicts, right? A lot of this stuff is in conflict with the concept of maximizing availability and maximizing the efficiency gains out of IT enabling everything, and in conflict with what we often see in this kind of space where those industrial control systems are long-term investments. The average IT system is, consider a server, right, has a shelf life of about 5 or 7 years probably at most. But these ICS systems have 30, 35, 40-year lifespans. That's a tough thing to fit. And when they're designed, they're usually designed really well. But they're not designed to have all this crap bolted onto it. And, in particular, the people that are bolting the crap onto it usually don't think it through to the extent that the original designers did. So that's my...
Yeah, I do want to say I read a little more into the actual report. I think the article itself is a little weak. The report actually goes a little deeper into some recommendations that I think are worth discussing. Uh, First, they talk about implementing agile and non-disruptive security. So they are defaulting on the you cannot disrupt anything. So to quote, in implementing security measures for critical infrastructures, tactical security tools should not disrupt operations during installation or routine maintenance. Reliability, safety, and zero downtime are paramount. I would say that's primarily the case, but I would say that is a reflection on whatever the culture is in the organization you're in. Now, the key is understanding that culture. If that is indeed the culture, it probably doesn't apply to every single piece of equipment. So I think you can categorize what sections and what areas have that sort of requirements and still build layered security a little further out from them. But, the other thing, deploy better authentication for application users, user mistakes, system glitches, disgruntled employees may be the most prevalent threats to enterprise infrastructure reliability and safety. I would disagree with that. I would say phishing and malicious code taking advantage of non-willful user mistakes. So I guess you cover that under user mistakes are probably the biggest threat that I'm seeing right now. So let's see. Reduce attack surfaces or targets. Sure, cannot complain about that. That's pretty obvious. Protect mobile data. Secure BYOD. Isolate endpoints and devices. Those are a bit more tactically useful bits of information, in my mind.
Yeah, the one thing, and I'm not exactly sure how they compiled their recommendations, but Ponemon surveys, which this was one of, tend to be, opinion surveys, and so that you have to take that into account when you read the survey and understand, or at least try to apply what it's telling you. It's again. Executives may not be the most authoritative source for, the ways to secure your industrial control systems.
To go off on a minor rant, it always cracks me up when CEOs of companies are called before Congress to testify about something. The CEO is usually not the authoritative person on whatever that topic is.
That's right.
At the level of detail that Congress is, in theory, looking for. Not that Congress has a clue either. But it's so funny because they're so removed from the actual tactical decision-making, especially on technical issues. All the executives can do is basically echo what they've briefed and understand it at a very high strategic level, and give assurances and platitudes. So it always cracks me up. If you really want to know, get the chief engineer there, or whoever depending on what it is you're talking about. Like I could point to GM, get one of their senior VPs of engineering there, who understands the technology and has a background in engineering, not an executive.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think there are times when you have executives, and I think it's the minority cases, probably in smaller companies, where they do have that background. But generally, you end up with a situation where you have legislators asking questions they don't understand to people who don't understand the questions, giving responses that don't make any sense to people who wouldn't understand the responses anyway. So, I guess no harm, no foul, maybe.
Yeah.
We'll go with that. All right. Our next story comes from Security Week. The title is Hackers Attack Shipping and Logistics Firms Using Malware-Laden Handheld Scanners. And this is a attack that a company called TrapX has called Zombie Zero. And apparently there is a manufacturer of some handheld scanners which, interestingly enough, run Windows XP inside the scanner itself, which are coming pre-owned with some malware. And it's kind of interesting because these scanners have to be associated with the company's networks and with their whatever shipping and receiving software or financial software that company is using. And so what they found here is that this software, or this malware, is basically making a record of everything that's being scanned in and some basically the manifest of what's coming in and going out. and sending it off to the attackers. And
Awesome.
And in addition to that, it's apparently installing some malware. And there's not a whole lot of detail that I could find on the method it does this, right? But it's installing some malware allegedly on the servers, the financial servers that the customer is using, and then using that as a actual command and control point for the scanners to then in turn exfiltrate the data out of the company. So this is yet another example where you can't really trust anything. You've got to be kind of suspicious.
You do have to be suspicious, but you have to trust something, right? I mean, let me back that up and try that again. You still have to do business, right? So you can't be paranoid and sit in your office and say, "Don't buy anything," because it could all be compromised, right? So yeah, you have to look at everything everything could be hostile.
That's the point, right? Everything has to be viewed with some amount of suspicion, and it's not just a dumb scanner. It is a potential source of malware, and they point out some recommendations on here. That you really ought to do some investigation and analysis on new hardware that you bring in. But the one interesting thing they actually point out in the article itself is that this one company they're talking about had 48 of the scanners, and only 16 of the scanners had the malware. So
I just have a lot of trouble echoing or agreeing with that piece of advice. I don't think most companies have the expertise, the time, or the budget to do that.
Well, and not only that, I'm not sure that it would be all that effective.
Yeah, I mean, they have a second piece of advice that I do agree with.
Right.
And I don't want to steal your thunder on that, but
no, go ahead.
They say the next best option is solid real-time monitoring that may be able to detect the malware as it's activated, et cetera, et cetera. I would say, and communicating and exfiltrating data. And I would say that is not the next best option. That's the best option.
Right.
Because it can now capture any piece of equipment that is doing something anomalous or trying to exfiltrate data. This is the upside of the current crop of malware, is they all want to exfiltrate data, so they all have to be noisy in some way. The key is, how do we catch them? How can we pick up that traffic as it's happening? It's not easy, but that is where I would focus my efforts.
I think you're absolutely right. That is, in my view, the thing that we should take away from this is that, again, we've talked about this a lot. Monitoring and closing down that window of detection is becoming of paramount importance, because it might not be your scanner. Maybe it's your load scale or something else. Barcode printer. There's so many avenues for this to happen through, and you're right. Most companies don't have the ability and skill to find this out, or to do their own testing. So
the other problem with that testing is it's a point in time.
Absolutely.
If it's preloaded, yeah, great, but who knows if it's going to get compromised down the line. I mean, the other option is just to wait for Google Project Zero to save us all, because those three guys are going to find everything.
Oh, I'm glad that you brought Project Zero up, because we're going to dedicate an entire 10 episodes.
I think we should.
To Project Zero.
And that might get us through most of the press release.
Oh boy. All right. So there were a couple of...
I'm a little snarky tonight, Mike.
There were a couple of other interesting things that, these scanners were coming from the manufacturer infected, but they were also distributing updates for the scanners on their website that had the malware too. So kind of to your point, maybe the scanner wasn't infected when you got it, but at some point in the future you went to apply an update and now it is infected. So that's interesting. And the other last interesting bit of data here is that the command and control system that it's reporting back to is apparently belongs to this vocational school, which, by the way, was also implicated in the Aurora attacks against Google and is one block away from the manufacturer of the scanners. So I'm sure it's total coincidence, and we shouldn't read anything into that, but there it is.
Oh my.
All right. Our next story comes from the TechNet blog. It's a very brief thing. This just is sounding the death bell for Windows 2003 server, giving you a heads up. July 2015, it's going away, people. We did such a great job with XP. Maybe we can do better with 2003. I don't know. Probably not.
Probably not.
All right. Next story comes from Data Breach Today. Title is Details Emerge of the Boeing Hack. So I got to tell you, there's not a lot of details despite the title. Apparently, a couple of people were arrested in connection with this attack. 3 people, in fact. And they are charged with stealing information about the C-17, the F-22, and the F-35 fighter jets. There was some, I guess I would interpret it as boastful emails going around in China, which somehow we intercepted, that said these people who apparently are freelancers and not actually allegedly agents of the Chinese government, stole 65 gigabytes of data from Lockheed over about a 2-year period. And the one thing I thought that was pretty interesting, despite the article not having a ton of detail, is some of the comments they had about the detection they had to avoid. So I'll just kind of read from that. So, from breaking into its internal network to obtaining intelligence, we repeatedly skipped around in its internal network to make it harder to detect reconnaissance, and we also skipped around it at suitable times in countries outside the U.S. In the process of skipping, we were supported by a prodigious quantity of tools, routes, and servers, which were also ensured the smooth landing of intelligence data. To evade
no pun intended.
None at all. To evade tracking by American law enforcement, the report says the attackers planned for numerous skip routes in many countries. The routes went through at least 3 countries, and we ensured one of them did not have friendly relations with the U.S., the document says. The hackers use so-called jump servers, special-purpose computers on the network, typically used to manage devices in separate security zones. So that kind of points out that, this is kind of garden variety fare for most people now. This is why the problem of attribution is so hard.
Yep. 100% agreed. It's why I've always had an issue with attributions, hacking back, anything like that. You have no idea if that IP address is really the source or just a launch point or something else. And it's so easy to spoof this stuff. It just is not a good way to go. Sorry, my thought just sort of died on me there, but
no, I think you're on the right point. Bob told me once that he worked at a service provider and they kept having servers compromised and found those servers being used to attack other companies. So, the company that Bob worked for, often looked like the source of some bad stuff, and in fact it wasn't. They were.
Well, to be fair, the company that's getting their servers hacked does have a responsibility to not get hacked, but they're
True.
not the ones who are behind the maliciousness.
Right, but being that Bob was in Bulgaria at the time, it wasn't fair to say that the Bulgarian government was attacking whatever company that was.
Though
right.
They are a little shady.
Well, we can go there.
Those Bulgarians, they owe me money.
All right, so moving on, this is another story from Data Breach Today, and the title is Testing Your APT Response Plan. So this is about a report that came out of ISACA, which is titled the APT Awareness. So kind of an interesting read. There are a couple of interesting findings, I thought, and basically to net it out, there's a correlation, or I'd say maybe a negative correlation, between whether or not you think that you've been targeted by an APT and whether you're prepared. And so if you believe strongly that you have been targeted, you you strongly believe that you're very prepared, and the converse seems to be true also. So if you believe it's not very likely, they say 30.5% of people say they're not prepared at all. So it's kind of an interesting thing. I thought it would be the other way around, to be perfectly honest. I figured that people that believe they had been targeted would see themselves as more vulnerable, but I guess it didn't bear out that way. And the other interesting thing is this points out kind of a lack of awareness of what kinds of controls it takes to prevent these kinds of attacks. And they find that essentially people are in general thinking that the traditional kinds of boundary defenses like firewalls are where it's at. And they have a table here in kind of descending order about what they think is the most effective methods for prevention. Antivirus is number one, which tells you something right there.
Yeah.
Then firewalls, routers, switches is second. Network segregation, IPS. So to be honest, it's kind of telling, and I'd be interested in understanding where the population comes from, because this is apparently a group of security professionals that were polled. However, ISACA, and I don't mean to disparage ISACA, right? But ISACA tends to be more on the compliance end of the universe, right? So, I wonder if the people they're surveying are kind of biased in one direction versus another. So anyway, it's an interesting article, and maybe why we're seeing some of the problems we are.
So I love the concept, testing, right? Testing your response plan. A few things I'll get out of the way. APT, right? What's an APT? What's your definition of APT? Everybody argues. I get that. But to quote Mike Tyson, everybody has a plan until they get punched.
That's a great point.
And you just don't know. And this isn't because I just work for an organization now that offers these sorts of services, but I've really started to become a big believer in the concept of you have to test this stuff if you think you have a plan. Just like DR testing, you don't know until you really test it. So I love the concept of having third parties really put your stuff to the test. So you don't have the internal politics, you don't have the internal biases, you don't have the internal, well, we're not going to worry about that because of this extenuating circumstance. If you really want to know, put it to the test, because the bad guys are going to have no mercy.
And they're not going to do it on your time. That's right.
And I'm not talking about Billy Bob's pen test for $59.95. I'm talking, some serious, they know what they're doing, real testing. Whether it be 0-day authoring to test against your environment that's never been seen before, to social engineering, to all sorts of stuff that is really simulating what the bad guys are really up to, not just throwing Nessus at your external perimeter and giving you a nice report and then, saying you're elite Haxor. Really hardcore stuff. And there's not that many companies that can really do that well. There's probably maybe 10 in the US. I don't know. That's just a round number. But I am a big believer in that. So I love the concept of getting folks to think about, you think you've got stuff, you think you're prepared, really test it, and then you'll know. At least you'll have a better idea.
Absolutely. Then you can go and address whatever's found. I think that's a great point.
Now, the only downside to this is, and this has always been my concern with any sort of pen testing or social engineering or malware simulation, is it typically points out one or two, maybe three of the ways that you're vulnerable. And you go patch those or you shore those up. So keep in mind that this is typically a results mission-based test. So if the bad guy, or in this case a simulated bad guy, achieves his mission, the only thing you're really uncovering is the way he achieved that mission. That may not be the only way to achieve that mission. So it should be an iterative process to keep getting that low-hanging fruit and then get tighter and tighter and tighter.
Yeah, and it's a point in time. It's a point
Yeah.
in time test as well. And
Absolutely.
what I've seen time and time again with these kinds of tests is that some things will work well one time, and then the next time, somebody didn't apply a patch or
Right.
something like that. So so it is important that again, depending on what you have to protect and how important it is, that you do this on an ongoing basis. And I really like the concept you outlined that you want to kind of keep turning down the screws, right? You want to do the test, find the low-hanging fruit, address it, do the test again, and just keep shoring things up. I think that's a really really good advice right there.
And what the one thing I would add to that is also look at the systemic issue of why that issue was introduced. Is there something in your process? Is there something in your development life cycle? Don't just triage and patch the hole. Figure out why that hole got introduced to begin with.
And then fire them.
Yeah, absolutely. Or put their head on a pike out front as a lesson.
There you go.
If you believe in the Game of Thrones management style. But ultimately figure out at a strategic level what your process is that's broken and how you can improve it. So you're not constantly just patching holes you're introducing.
Yes.
Now, that can mean a whole bunch of things to a whole bunch of people. Whether you're launching apps and whatnot before you've really gone through security review, you have no security development lifecycle, you have, security is not being involved in any architecture decisions, whatever it may be. Look at the root cause, not just, we got to fix that.
Yep, absolutely. All right, our next story comes from CSO Online, and the title is Revamping Your Insider Threat Program. And boy, this is a weird article. I suspect it's because it's translated from some other website, but it's just formatted so weird. But the net point is that, and I think it's a good point because I see it happening in spades, and Bob tells me he sees it a lot too. There's a lot of companies right now doing a lot of introspection in the wake of Snowden and all of the other big high-profile data disclosures. And I can certainly tell you that contractors in particular are kind of falling under really interesting amounts of scrutiny across lots of companies right now, which I'm not entirely sure I understand that because I don't think the numbers bear that out. But the point is that the problem here is, it's not employee versus contractor. It's what do you have access to? And so that's what this article is pointing out, that the problem comes down to privileged access. And they have a couple of tips that they outline in here, and some of them I think are, again, kind of high level, not terribly useful, but some of them are maybe more tactical. So first one is build a multidisciplinary team consisting of IT, HR, and legal in key lines of business. That sounds really great, except when you're in a very, very large company, that starts to get pretty difficult. Target people in areas with privileged access. Look at data flows within the company and anything that goes out. Again, the idea here is looking for things that are out of the ordinary. Understand the information needs of customers, employees, and suppliers. That kind of goes into least privilege. Making sure that if you don't have to worry about data exfiltration or people stealing your IP if they don't have access to it in the first place. And, obviously if there's no other security related problems. Balance the needs of employees and the company's security requirements. That's another one of those pie in the sky, happy horseshit statements. Create guidelines and communicate them in employee handbooks and elsewhere. I think that's kind of a COIA when we go to court and cross swords. That's going to save my butt and fry yours. Use technology to enforce your guidelines and create whistleblower programs to keep anonymity intact for both the accuser and the accused. And then what follows is kind of a random assortment of stuff. But I would net it out to say, plan ahead. You don't want to be figuring the stuff out as it's happening. When you find out that something's been posted to Pastebin or has been given to a customer, you don't want to be trying to ram through your data leakage program at that point. You want to try to figure this out ahead of time. New technology creates new avenues for theft, I think, is another important lesson that, when we start moving stuff into the cloud and onto personally owned devices and whatever else, I think most of those things have been talked about to death, and we're probably pretty well aware of them. But right now we're in a time of kind of tremendous innovation in technology, and we have to be, as IT people or as IT security people, we have to kind of be aware that that's changing the game constantly, and there's always going to be new things popping up that present a new threat, and we need to stay ahead of that. Looking for anomalies based on the roles and expected behaviors of people, and maybe it's not enough to just block access for people to a certain set of data. You should probably be looking to see if they're trying to access it. And if they are and they're failing, that might be an indication that something is up, and you ought to go invest.
They've never accessed it before, and suddenly they're accessing it at 3 a.m.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, they may inadvertently have rights to that data, accidentally, for whatever reason. But yeah, there's a couple of products out there now that are all about profiling access behavior and noting baselines of what is normal behavior, what is, things like, hey, everybody in this AD group has this access to these things, and this person has this plus this other stuff. Do they need it? Or this person's never accessed this data before, and suddenly they are. I think those sorts of things that they need to mature a little more, but I'm glad that we're seeing vendors out there starting to build that sort of anomaly detection. I think can go a long way towards this sort of insider stuff.
Yeah, I would agree with that. My concern, coming from a larger organization, I think this gets to become a really unwieldy problem, given the way that especially larger organizations just like to let data proliferate everywhere. And, to an extent, we're not doing ourselves any favors by letting that happen, because now when we want to go through and do something like this, it becomes a lot harder. But at the same time, if you're a large company with tens or hundreds of thousands of people, it's difficult to consolidate all of that, into just a couple of places. They do make mention about removing unnecessary access, which I think we just talked about. Focusing on older applications that might have bad or what I would call immature permissions models. I hadn't really thought about this, but this is a good point. And I see quite a lot of problems, especially in larger companies. IT investment IT is something that you want to minimize, right? You always want to be looking to the strategic thing, and you want to minimize your non-strategic spend. And so what that often does is create these orphans. So you have these older applications that, essentially run lots of the business, and they become non-strategic. And now no one wants to spend any money on them. And so it becomes difficult. And that creates lots of problems, not just this, right? It creates problems for, patching, and because they tend to be more complex applications like, an SAP or an Oracle or a PeopleSoft or something like that, which, it's not a simple thing to patch them. But there's no money. Nobody wants to spend, the $200,000 to go through and migrate your customizations to the new version. But I think the same problem applies here, that some of those older things may not have a permission system that really makes sense for your current business model, and now people have access to stuff they don't need, and that's not a great thing. They implement they say they recommend implementing what I would call the see something, say something model, which, not a great big fan of in the government circles, but, I guess in the business context, it kind of makes sense that, if you see your coworker, with a pocket full of USB drives, maybe that's a problem. I don't know. I suppose it can also create some adversarial relationships, which may create some other problems. But when I was reading that, I was thinking about the YouTube skit about, for some reason, about the be handsome and don't be or be attractive, don't be unattractive kind of thing. Where you don't want to piss off your coworkers. So you need to make sure that you conform to what they're expecting.
Yeah, that whole see something, say something, I think has the same sort of pitfalls as employee education on security threats. I wouldn't rely on it.
No, I agree with that. They do have some interesting things. It kind of goes into some weird places. They start making some recommendations that people who are investigating other people, basically they recommend creating, I forget the exact terms they call it, right? But the an investigations group where you can have them go and you can have your people go and report suspected problems, and then they'll go and do some investigation. And they recommend that those people be on a separate network. And then those people who are on the separate network need someone to watch them to make sure they're not doing inappropriate things too. And I guess those people should also be on a separate network and have somebody else watching them who's also on a separate network.
Right. And eventually I think the appropriate number of watchers watching the Watchmen is around 73.
I've always wondered what the right number is.
Yeah, that's been my experiments. Yielded 73.
73, okay. Right there. There you go. See? That's the kind of value that we bring right there. Oh, boy. And I guess the last thing they point out is that you really need to focus on protecting what's important, because if you're going to try to protect everything, you're probably not going to do a great job at protecting anything. To an extent, I think that makes a lot of sense. However, I think that it's a little myopic to think that, again, given the proliferation of data, it's very difficult to focus on a particular thing, right? Because it tends to get mixed in with all sorts of other data. And also my experience is, especially in larger companies, it's really difficult to say all what's important. And you tend to default to, well, it's all important.
Much less keep up with it as new data is created.
Exactly. And then, you have the problem of, especially in larger companies, the originator of the data becomes the authority of, whether it's important or not. And, that brings its own set of problems. So, I think a lot of these tend to apply to some of the smaller kind of organizations. In the larger organizations, I see much more complex problems to solve, and I'm not really seeing them solved well, to be honest. So, the last story we have comes from Krebs on Security, and it makes me go, "What the fuck?" The title is "Beware Keyloggers at Hotel Business Centers."
Yeah.
So apparently the Secret Service and the Department of Homeland Security in the U.S. issued an advisory to the hospitality industry. And this was a non-public advisory, saying that they had recently arrested some people in Texas who were going around local Texas hotels, checking in with stolen credit cards and planting keyloggers on the hotel computers. I want to know who in their right mind is not already thinking this. And
90% of non-security people.
Okay, but we're
Why do we have to remind them to patch every time something comes out?
well, fair enough. Fair enough. But so why is this not on Good Morning America? or Entertainment Tonight?
It hasn't gone viral enough yet. I don't know. It hasn't been said in the right way of hotel computers are trying to kill you.
It kind of boggles my mind. I guess I would have assumed that this was just a kind of common knowledge, but I guess you're right. Maybe I'm too optimistic about the world.
Well, it's the echo chamber, right? And this is something that we keep talking about trying to break out of, and this is something where I think it's a good thing to remember of our view of reality is incredibly rare, and the vast majority of people are just happy if their computer works, man.
No, that's a good point. Good point.
And they're still just trying to get by, much less worry about all this security crap.
Good point.
Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't mock the article, but
yeah, and Krebs goes on and basically says there's really no good way that you can reasonably protect these things. So
that's not true. That is not true. There's all sorts of technology out there that you could boot up a virtual image on a USB stick. You could, if you're a business traveler, connect back to something. There are ways you can protect yourselves. Don't use these machines. Use a laptop that you trust.
Well, I think that's the point. This goes back to the point of the attackers have physical access to these systems, and so you don't really know what they might have done to the systems, which includes hardware keyloggers, not just software keyloggers, and
that's true.
And on and on and on, right? So and that was his point, and he actually references the old Microsoft's 10 immutable laws of security, which interestingly still hold true.
This also reminds me of things like ATM skimmers and such, right? If you don't have physical control of the box, you don't know what's been done to it.
Absolutely, and those skimmers are getting pretty freaking clever these days. All right, well that is the show for tonight. Thank you again for listening, and thank you, Mr. Cowett.
Oh, thank you. Always enjoyable and pleasurable. And hey, guys, I just one thing I wanted to say. If you have taken anything we've said on the show and done something with it, I'd love to know. I'd love to know what you think of our random ranting and advice. Is it useful? Is it accurate? Does it get you in trouble? Has it gotten you fired? Has it been useful in your environment? Do you disagree with us? Drop us a line. Love to know how things went from all of our random ranting in your particular day job.
Yes, especially since, I work in the carpet industry and Andy works at a car dealership, so
I can get you a great deal on a 94 Honda.
We have no idea what we're talking about.
It's true. We're actually reading this off the back of a CISSP prep guide.
It's true. Anyhow, as Andy said, if you have any feedback, send us an email to info@defensivesecurity.org. It's it's really interesting to hear from listeners. Now that we are up to about 18, that's it's pretty awesome. So if you want to find the show, you can find us on the internet at www.defensivesecurity.org. You can find links to all the stories we've talked about tonight and all the back episodes and links to the stories in those. You can find us on Twitter at DefensiveSec. You can find Mr. Cowett on Twitter at Lurg and me on Twitter at MaliciousLink. And if you do like the podcast, tell a friend. This is intended to be helpful to all. That's why we do it. It's a labor of love. And if you find it useful, give us some love on iTunes as well. That helps us bump up in the ratings too. So with that, we call it another week. Thank you very much, and we'll talk again.
Good night. See you.
Bye-bye.